All right, thank you, everyone. Should we get started? Okay. On behalf of the Public Health Council and the over 5,000 members of the LA County Medical Association, we bring you a very important topic that I know is on the top of our consciousness, especially in light of the tragic mass shooting event that killed close to 20 children and adults yesterday. And our hearts are heavy for the families and the community of Uvalde, Texas. And we are definitely full of emotions in response to that. Now, this event had been planned for months and would have been timely even without yesterday's tragedy, which is a sad reminder of the need for us to build emotional strength in kids. I am Jeffrey Lee. I am the 50th president of the LA County Medical Association. And so I want to welcome all of you to this special event. Before I introduce the co-chairs of the Public Health Council, I have a few housekeeping items to remind you of. Portions of this session will be recorded, so please be aware of that. Please stay on mute. Anyone that comes off of mute, it can be disruptive, and we just want you to be able to all hear what the speakers have to say. You are able to use the chat, and hopefully we will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So feel free to enter questions into the chat, but please, we ask that you not come off of mute until the end. And then also be aware that for physicians, CME credit is available and a form will be emailed after the presentation. Lastly, one of the reasons for the delay is we had some technical difficulties. Many of you were assigned the Zoom name of Noemi Corona. That's actually one of our staff members. We're trying to figure that out. So please rename yourself so that we know who is speaking and we can properly identify the participants. Let me introduce our co-hosts, our co-chairs. Dr. Diana Sheba, our immediate past president and inaugural co-chair of the Public Health Council, is not able to join us, but I want to thank her for her service on the council, for being a catalyst to bringing this entity into existence. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Heather Silverman, who is our other inaugural co-chair of the Public Health Council. Dr. Silverman, along with Dr. Sharon Jacobs-Wallman, have been critical in putting together tonight's program. So I want to thank the both of them for all of their hard work. And at this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Silverman to introduce the Public Health Council's mission and vision. Dr. Silverman?
Oh, thank you, Dr. Lee. Welcome, everyone. The mission of the LACMA Public Health Council is to promote the physical, social, and mental health of the people of Los Angeles County through advocacy, policy development, and partnership with public health and community-based organizations. You know, when I was reading through this today, I had to reflect on the idea of physical, social, and mental health. And there is no physical health without mental health. And there's no mental health without social health. So in some ways, each one informs the other, and you can't consider one without the other. In looking at the values of the Public Health Council, we support evidence-based, future-focused, equitable, feasible, and patient-centric public health policy and initiatives while respecting an individual's personal health goals to promote their own best possible health outcome. And I think we could take a minute for everyone to read the goals. Certainly public health is a hot button topic, and there can often be a ditch on each side of the road, but it is important to move forward, and we hope to bring more programs, and in the future we are looking at things like gun safety and ways we can promote public health. I want to thank Sharon Jacobs Waldman, who's really been instrumental in putting this program together. And I think it's a wonderful program. And Sharon, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silverman, and welcome everyone. So excited to have our first Public Health Council meeting, and what an important topic and unfortunately timely one it is. In December of 2021, the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, warned of a devastating mental health crisis among adolescents. Many hospital and physician groups declared it a national emergency. This decline in mental health predated the pandemic, with 13% of adolescents reporting a major depressive episode in 2019, up 60% from 2007. And suicide rates for people aged 10 to 24, which had been stable from 2000 to 2007, jumped almost 60% by 2018. The LACMA Public Health Council has brought together a fantastic group of speakers with expertise on the mental health of children to bring attention to this national crisis during Mental Health Awareness Month. We would like to thank the LACMA CEO, Gustavo Friedrichsen, LACMA President, Dr. Jeffrey Lee, immediate past President, Dr. Diana Sheba, Public Health Council Co-Director, Dr. Heather Silverman, and administrators Noemi Corona and Lisa Lay for putting this amazing program together. I'd like to start by introducing Congresswoman Grace Napolitano, whom I have the pleasure of knowing personally. She was first elected to Congress in 1998. Congresswoman Grace Napolitano is currently serving her 12th term. Her Los Angeles County-based district covers several cities and communities in the San Gabriel Valley. She serves on the House Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure and is currently the chairwoman on the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment. Napolitano is the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Mental Health Caucus. She's been active in securing mental health parity in the Affordable Care Act and promoting mental health legislation and working with prominent figures to increase funding and access to mental health services. Her 2001 program providing on-site mental health and suicide prevention services in 4 schools has expanded to 35 schools with assistance from the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and now serves as a model program for HR 721. The Mental Health Service for Students Act. She's also the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Youth Challenge Caucus. The LACMA Public Health Council is so grateful and honored to have her here to speak with us during Mental Health Awareness Month. It is also our great honor to present her with a plaque in recognition for her many years of service in the US Congress and her tireless advocacy for funding of mental health programs in schools. Welcome, Congresswoman Napolitano. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so honored to have you here.
Thank you, Sharon. It's a pleasure seeing you again. And thank the organization of LACMA for beginning to get more vocal and prominent in speaking for children. The greatest need right now is for children, especially when you see tragedies like yesterday. It is said that the young man who had been bullied, that's one of the things that we have tried to address when we put mental health in schools, to be sure that people realize how important the schools, the teachers get the training, that they need to recognize these different kinds of things that the kids go through. It's hard to say. Anyway, it's thank you for the honor. I'm very grateful to you. We want to thank you for inviting me today to participate. Like you said, I co-chair the Mental Health Caucus with my good friend. He joined the caucus because he was on suicide for children. He has a passion for that because his niece committed suicide. May is Mental Health Month, and we tried to get the White House involved in this. And I think maybe we might get something on going into the Senate. Today was a meeting with the Gun Violence Task Force, and we talked about things that need to be done to increase the ability of us to pass legislation to have everybody register guns, not just what the police and everybody else that have guns. There's other things that happen, and I would like to tell you that I'm very proud of the work that is done in my office with Irma, Dr. Diaz, and my staffer, Joseph, who is very much keen on mental health. So thank you for awarding me this very prestigious award. And I don't deserve it. They do. They do all the work. Thank you, Sharon. And I'm glad to hear from you. I look forward to hearing what the organization has to say.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We're so honored to have you here, and we are so grateful to have you in Congress, where you've been advocating so strongly for us and for so many years. And I'm hoping that this is the time that we can really get some of this work done. And we really appreciate, and this award is only the smallest token of what we could do for all the work that you've done. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here out of your busy schedule.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're really looking forward to hear from Dr. Diaz as well. Dr. Irma Elisheva Diaz is the Health and Mental Health Liaison for Congresswoman Grace Napolitano. She's representing the California's 32nd Congressional District. She manages the Mental Health Consortium for the Congresswoman, which is comprised of the behavioral health leaders that work in every area of our communities. She has a firsthand grassroots knowledge of the mental health issues facing children, youth, and their families. In addition to her work with the Congresswoman, she serves bereaved families, offering grief group counseling for Eminent Health, whose affiliates are the Hospice and Home Care Facility, Queen of the Valley Hospital, Intercommunity Hospital, and Foothill Presbyterian Hospital in the San Gabriel Valley. Dr. Diaz is an international author and lecturer whose holistic and inspirational communication skills have helped to nurture many through spiritual, mental, and emotional health struggles. The LACMA Public Health Council is thrilled to invite her and the members of the Congresswoman Napolitano's Mental Health Consortium to our audience as we recognize Mental Health Awareness Month. Dr. Diaz will share with us how the collective trauma from this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has affected our children and the importance of being trauma-informed when we provide care for them. Welcome, Dr. Diaz. We look forward to hearing from you.
And Sharon, may I add, she's also a rabbi?
I had no idea.
Yes, I am. I'm also a rabbi, so
Excited.
thank you. Thank you.
Rabbi Diaz.
Thank you, Dr. Waldman. It's a very good evening to all. It's my honor to join LACMA and, of course, Congresswoman Grace Napolitano and all my fellow panelists for this important evening. As a mother and a grandmother, this topic naturally is very meaningful to me. As the Congresswoman's Health and Mental Health Liaison, I have the distinct opportunity of keeping my hand on the pulse of our communities in the 32nd Congressional District, which is 65 to 70% Hispanic. I am in contact with educators, physicians, city officials, law enforcement, mental health clinicians, first responders, and clergy most of the time on a weekly basis. It is this space given to me by the Congresswoman that helps us to ascertain the real needs of the communities that she serves. Which brings me to our topic this evening, building emotional strength in our kids. In order to do this topic justice, we must first contemplate what emotional strength looks like for a child. Let's go to the next slide, please. As defined by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress and relate to others and make healthy choices. This is no different for children. Emotions and social interactions are a daily part of children's lives, both in and out of school, which is why many educators prioritize three critical and interrelated components of mental health. Socially, how our children relate to others, emotionally, how they feel, and how they act, their behavior. Very, 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 very important. The fact is that if a child has a hard time sorting out these areas because of everyday life around them, we know the majority of those children will not get one-on-one therapy to help them. And although what the school is doing is important, we must never forget that resilience is built outside the classroom as well. This is why parenting, community, and its leaders must take the time to understand our children. How do we as parents, caregivers, educators, community leaders, spiritual leaders, build mental and emotional wellness in our children with the onslaught of this pandemic. While our communities are bearing the brunt of this pandemic in health and mental health within every sect in society, the truth is we weren't adequately addressing this crisis before the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse. So I submit to you that in order to even attempt to answer that question, we must look at the issues that come into play that are within the scope of the child's life along with their experiences. Without this foundation, it is difficult to accurately assess the impact that the individual and collective trauma ensued by the pandemic has had on our children mentally and emotionally during the last 2, almost 3 years. Questions like, how do communities internalize mental health symptoms? How do families internalize it? These are loaded questions that I'm afraid tonight we won't be able to completely cover. Notwithstanding, we must realize they are questions that must be answered in order for us to be effective when addressing the mental health struggles in our communities and for helping our children. So the 2 areas I will barely touch on today are within collective trauma and the importance of understanding what it is to be trauma informed for the children in our lives. I would like to present to you a few very simple slides merely for food for thought. Next slide, please. Let's define collective trauma. Collective trauma is a response that can follow a variety of traumatic experiences. Situations that may elicit a collective trauma response include things like war, natural disaster, mass shootings, terrorism, the pandemic, all of these that you see listed here. This can impact an entire community. When we think of trauma, it is imperative that we consider the times we are living in and the ways that children have been impacted by those times. Even children who have stable home lives can still be affected with the collective trauma we are going through. The conditions of our communities really do impact the family unit. I feel duty-bound this evening to absolutely remind our audience, parents, clinicians, community leaders, that our communities are comprised of families, children from all cultures and all walks of life. To think that we can address challenges in mental health for families and our children without the elasticity of knowledge and training in cultural diversity and sensitivity is one of the biggest blunders we have made as mental health leaders and advocates. To think that we have succeeded because we got funding when the funding is appropriated in areas that are oversaturated with care and leaving out the urgency of the entire community is a challenge that must be addressed. Our children fall within those very challenges. By just about every measure, the efforts to personalize mental health care is lagging far behind all the other efforts toward chronic diseases. Families, especially those of color, face disproportionate iniquities in mental health care. There is a blatant, absolutely blatant lack of culturally appropriate services. The collective trauma from this pandemic and now the daily breaking news only complicates it all. How can we simplify and best understand this for ourselves? Next slide, please. I want everyone in this meeting to think about what happens to you when you see breaking news across your television screen. Some of you may notice a physiological response. I know for me, I get tense and I sometimes get quiet thinking about what I just saw or heard. Last night, I had a lump in my throat. I felt like I was gonna weep. When you see it, it pulls you in, it absorbs you. Or you may be so used to seeing it that you feel numb to it. Maybe you recall a time when you felt tense seeing it. Let's take a moment very quickly, because I don't have a lot of time, to think about how concerned we are with what happened yesterday in Texas. The children that were shot dead, the 2 teachers that were killed, the war in Ukraine, the possibility of nuclear war and how it will affect us here in the United States. Very, very quickly, in your chat box, on a scale of 1 to 10, being as honest as you possibly can, put a number in there, 10 being the worst of how this impacts you. and be as honest as you can. 3 seconds. I don't know if all of you can see this, but I want you to see the numbers. 6, 7, 10, 9, 5, 8, 7 again. When we look at these numbers, it's important to understand how the range is. We all have access to the same information, living the same time, yet we are being impacted in different ways. All of us experience life differently, current events differently, and children are no different. Things like our culture, the way the adults think and talk, religion, all impacts our children. One child self-regulates, and in the very same home, the other child can't sleep at night. Knowing this truth helps us understand our experience is different than the next person. And when we understand it, we feel less alone. To be able to create spaces like this, where we understand we experience things in life differently, is very healing for us and especially our children. The important thing to remember is that when we are helping our children, it is about their experience and not ours. We should not ever impose what we feel or are experiencing ourselves. Parents sometimes struggle with this when they are overwhelmed with the pressure of responsibilities that they are challenged with. This has been the case in many families during the pandemic. One parent is laid off of work, and now there's one income. The rent is due, and the one car they have is soon to be repossessed. Suddenly, everything in the home becomes the parent's experience. This is the reality. The children are overwhelmed and saddened to see mommy and daddy arguing and unhappy. Next slide, please. So how is it looked at from a child's eyes? Our environment places a part in how our nervous system responds. There's a wide range of experiences. These drawings tell us what the child is experiencing. We see a happy family up at the right, wearing masks, but they're a family. Then you see the other ones, not so happy. The one at the top, a little angry, I would say. The little girl in her bedroom, a little sad. We see these and we realize that having trauma-informed lenses means that you are present to that and sensitive to it. Suddenly you become aware of the element between you and the child. Many children with mental health problems struggle in school and at home. Many children do not get the services they need, which can lead to worsened conditions that later are harder to treat and to poorer life outcomes. Next slide. So when we think of being trauma-informed, think of the words that we use with kids at home. Think about the words we use at school as educators. When you say the word home to a child, they may either see a happy family or they may see themselves being yelled at or somebody yelling at them and them being fearful. When you say school, a child may be happy, online, studying, and another child may feel overwhelmed. When you see nighttime, you see a child sleeping and the other one fearful. When you say, what about dinner time? A child may see a full dinner buffet and another child may hardly see any food at all. Just like adults, every child is different and our words will trigger feelings. So being trauma-informed means that we engage children in ways that foster feelings of safety. When we are communicating with our children, we must remember that we are wanting to be sensitive to the experience they have had and not the experience we have had. Every child has had a different experience through this pandemic. It is not a one-size-fits-all situation. So questions we might ask ourselves before addressing our children about life as it stands today is, what has been their experience? Being trauma-informed does not mean we take away the child's experience. Next slide, please. Here is ways to boost feelings of safety for our children. How is it that I create predictability? When we look at this, we look at the left side, unpredictability, lives that are unpredictable, inconsistent. There's chaos, there's loss, there's abandonment, there's silence. Nobody talks about anything. And their minds are just all over the place. But to be predictable, to have a predictable life is to be secure. Consistency in a home, certainty, to have routines, to have times of togetherness, to have times of knowing that you are safe, to have times that you can hear a voice that cares about you. This is predictability. This is what we look for. So we need to challenge ourselves to work at these areas. And I have to say, one thing missing in this slide for parents listening today is unconditional love. Never hold back your love. Express it. Love heals. Love brings security, and it breaks the power of fear. Next slide. I would like to invite everyone today to consider your approach in the ways that we engage our children. Trauma-informed approaches isn't a set of strategies. It is ultimately an exercise in empathy, patience, and flexibility. In conclusion, I heard someone say, when my children were little, they sat on my lap. And when they grew up, they now sit on my heart. I say, let's help them while they are on our laps. It is my humble consensus that this topic is well worth our time and effort. And I thank the Los Angeles County Medical Association and Congresswoman Napolitano for asking me to be a part of this event. I have 2 announcements, and I want to make sure that I have the time. Dr. Waldman, do I have time for 2 announcements?
I can hardly deny you after such a powerful and moving speech. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
But please go ahead.
So please go to the next slide if you would. So this is very important to let everybody know about. In 2020, Congress passed the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act, which created a new 3-digit number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. 988 goes live on all devices on July 16th of this year, and it will build out 3 core elements: call centers, mobile crisis units, and crisis stabilization programs. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is funded by SAMHSA and has been administered by Vibrant Emotional Health since it began in 2005. You can find information on the SAMHSA website if you're interested in it, but after July 16th, we're not only going to have 911, we're going to have 988. And that's very important for everyone to know. And if you'd like information, you can email me and I'll be happy to send you that information. The next thing I wanted to tell you about is that today agencies across and I don't have a slide for this, the US Department of Health and Human Services issued a joint letter to states, tribes, and jurisdictions, encouraging them to prioritize and maximize their efforts to strengthen children's mental health and well-being. The letter was signed by leaders of the Health Resources and Services Administration, the Substance Abuse and many, many leaders. And so it's an exciting time that was brought about, by some of the work of Secretary Xavier Becerra, working with the White House. And so I can send you, Dr. Waldman, I can send you that information so that you can have that available to your membership. And then last but not least, the consortium, if you could show that slide, please. Those of you that are interested in contacting me and hearing more about the Congresswoman's Mental Health Consortium, we would love to have you join. We'd love to hear from you, and I know she would. And so if you're interested, please jot down the number, jot down the email address, and get in touch with me so that you can join in. We have some very interesting virtual roundtables at the moment and are planning some face-to-face meetings in the future. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and God bless all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diaz. What a moving talk. I really appreciate, and I'm so glad that you took the time to give us that really excellent information and so needed at this time for anyone in crisis. I did add the email to the chat from the slide, but we're going to move on to the next presentation. And I thank you so much for such a moving talk.
My honor.
Next, we have Mayor Blanca Pacheco. I have the honor of having invited her also to speak at my own hospital, Kaiser Downey, and she is our Downey mayor, and we are so proud of her. She is the first Latina to serve as the mayor of Downey. She is a success story stemming from her wonderful education in the Downey Unified Schools. She's a proud graduate of UCLA and Loyola Law School. She has a solid commitment to her community and has been involved with numerous legal organizations offering pro bono services. She's a member of the Kiwanis Club of Downey, Gangs Out of Downey, and the Downey Elks Lodge. Her passion for serving her community was recognized in 2016 when she received from the city of Downey the Women of the Year Award from Assembly Member Cristina Garcia. When she is not working or volunteering, she enjoys meeting new people and discovering new places in her beloved Downey. The LACMA Public Health Council is excited to introduce Mayor and State Assembly Member candidate Blanca Pacheco and to hear her speak about her very successful and innovative annual summer workshop for Downey teens called Girls on Fire. This interactive workshop is focused on nurturing the psychological and emotional well-being of young women with education on healthy relationships, cyberbullying, and suicide prevention. It is my great honor and to invite Mayor Pacheco to speak for us, and thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And I just want to say how much of a pleasure it is to be here with all of you. And Dr. Diaz, what an amazing presentation. I love the passion. I love all the information. You just did an amazing job. So thank you very much. And also to all of you, thank you for having me. This is valuable information that we are sharing. And for me, it's been about helping the youth. As a Kiwanian, it's all about our youth. And like our Congresswoman, Grace Napolitano had mentioned, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. But for me, it's been very important and very pivotal to help our youth, especially our young ladies. And that is a reason why Girls on Fire is a program that I am most proud of. Next slide. This program was a program that we developed in 2019. And as all of you are aware, our young girls face a unique set of challenges as they enter from junior high school to high school. They deal with so much stress at the school level with many issues of social interactions, and there's various dynamics within the home life. As such, these environments have had a profound impact on our youth. This has been the case even before the pandemic. And recent studies have shown that teens and young adults coming of age today are dealing with even more depression than what was dealt with before. And they're dealing with more stress than our younger generation was even over a decade ago. And so Girls on Fire program offers a safe space for our young girls to discuss and learn how to manage these issues by focusing on 3 pillars: self-image, worth, self-care, and empowerment. The program is a 3-day, half-day camp that includes a series of interactive presentations, physical fitness activities, team building sessions, also led by female leaders within the community. Next slide. Topics that are discussed are self-defense, which our female Downey police officers participate in. We discuss cyberbullying, internet crimes and legal aspects, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, building self-esteem, suicide prevention, healthy relationships, and also accessing resources. Next slide. So in 2019, which is actually the last time we held this program, we had 107 girls participate. And this year we are planning on having 150 girls participate. We are planning on holding this event July 25th, 26th, and 27th. And we're doing this event in collaboration with our Downey Unified School District. We are excited about having this program because it's been 3 years since the last time we held this program, and there was a need back in 2019, and there is even more of a need in 2022. So we have been able to hold this event, again, thanks to the collaboration that we have with Downey Unified School District, with our fantastic staff, with all the volunteers that we have within the community, and also the partnership and the sponsorship that we were able to get from Kaiser Permanente. Next slide. So this is my opportunity to see if there's any questions, but this is an exciting program that we held. Again, for me, it's all about helping the youth, and having this program was my way of motivating, encouraging, and helping our youth from self-defense, mental health, just providing them with the tools that they need to be successful adults.
Thank you, Mayor Pacheco. I think we're going to save the questions to the end. I really enjoyed your presentation. I think your program is so fantastic. It's multidisciplinary. You have the police department, you had psychiatrists. I mean, it's amazing. And I think it's just the kind of initiative and innovation that we need to fight this mental health crisis that we have. And I really, really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us today.
Thank you.
And it's now my great pleasure to introduce a friend and almost colleague, Dr. Judy Ho. She is a triple board certified and licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, a tenured associate professor at Pepperdine University, and published author. Her book, Stop Self-Sabotage, published by HarperCollins in August 2019, details the scientifically driven 6-step program, which has been translated into 7 additional languages around the world. Her second book, which is co-authored with Max Dubrow, is entitled, I'll Give It to You Straight-ish, What Your Teen Wants You to Know, and is published by Flashpoint. It contains Dr. Judy's evidence-based tips to help parents raise healthy and resilient teenagers. Dr. Judy maintains a private practice in Manhattan Beach, where she specializes in comprehensive neuropsychological assessments and expert witness work. She regularly appears as an expert psychologist on television, podcasts, and radio, and contributes to other media, including print and electronic periodicals. She's a co-host of the syndicated daytime television talk show, The Doctors, co-host of CBS's Face the Truth, and host of the Supercharged Life podcast, which focuses on scientific and tangible tips for physical and mental wellness and strategies for motivation and productivity. It is produced by Stage 29 Podcast Productions. The LACMA Public Health Council is honored to invite Dr. Ho to share evidence-based tips for helping children and teens build resilient skills, as well as how we as parents and treatment providers can identify challenges and best support them. Thank you so much, Dr. Ho, for joining us. You really do lead a supercharged life, and we are so excited to hear from you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Jacobs Waldman, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this amazing event. It is really an honor to be here. Let's jump right in and talk about how we can cultivate mental health resiliency in our children and teens. Next slide, please. So no surprise to anybody, we have been seeing an uptick in mental health concerns in our youth. And these are just a few of the statistics that illustrate the impact that the pandemic especially has had on escalating some of these symptoms in our children and our teens. Next slide, please. Couple of things to point out. 1 in 6 youth will experience a mental health condition, and 50% of all lifetime mental health conditions start before the age of 14. And interestingly, this is happening across the age span. So it's not just our younger children, it's not just our older teens, it's really all across the board. Next slide, please. Among children ages 2 to 8, 17% had a diagnosable clinical condition. And this, of course, is a higher number and a higher problem for individuals living below the federal poverty level. Among youth aged 12 to 17, you can see here that 37% had a persistent feeling of sadness or hopelessness, and 19% has seriously considered taking their own life. These are really, really important statistics, because sometimes we might hear something from a child, a teen, and we think, okay, they probably didn't mean that. But this is when we need to jump in. We need to ask those questions, engage them in conversation, and intervene. Next slide, please. So what are some of the warning signs of mental health concerns in the children and teens that you live with, work with, and love? Well, here are some of the things that you want to watch for. If they start to have difficulties with activities of daily living, getting up in the morning, showering, getting dressed, getting their meals ready, that's definitely one of the signs. Significant changes to everyday routines, for example, having extremely late bedtimes for weeks on end, isolation and social withdrawal, and even secretiveness about what they're doing. Excessive anxiety. For a lot of younger children, this looks like separation anxiety. For some of our older children, this might actually look like obsessions and compulsions, where they're trying to do certain things to try to manage the anxiety that is coming up. Depression can look very different across the lifespan, but for children, aside from these symptoms here, you're also going to see them complaining about their physical condition. They're in good health, but they're saying that their head hurts, their stomach hurts. That's definitely a sign to watch out for, especially when it becomes chronic. And of course, changes in their academic performance. That's also a warning sign that perhaps there's a mental health concern we need to look into. Next slide, please. Contrast that to warning signs of a mental health crisis. So this is when a child or a teen might be getting to a breaking point where they might be considering doing something to hurt themselves and even possibly other people. And so we definitely need to take a look at this and make sure that when we see any of these signs, that we connect with a mental health professional, call a crisis line and/or 911. There's a number of different hotlines that are available. Dee Hirsch, that's local to us, has a great hotline. It's anonymous that people can call at any time. There's also the National Suicide Hotline, and those resources are very, very helpful. You can text, you can call. There's a lot of different ways to get connected. So if they're actually talking about hurting themselves, expressing active suicidal thoughts and death ideation, I wish I was dead, I wish I wasn't living, that's a warning sign of a mental health crisis. Giving away possessions, stating that their life isn't worthwhile, that's also another warning sign. Making verbal threats to harm themselves or others in any format, whether it's to a friend on social media, in an email, in a text, or verbally. Engaging in any kind of self-harm behavior like cutting, or experiencing hallucinations or delusions, seeing things that aren't there, believing that people are after them when they're not. For all of these types of signs, if you see even one of these signs, it might be important to connect with a mental health professional to get those resources and get your child or your teenager into necessary treatment. But let's now talk about what we can do. Let's talk about the protective factors that we can offer our youngsters to help them to thrive in every area of their life. So we know from research and clinical evidence that these are the areas in which these protective factors will help to bolster the child's mental health well-being. And even in the face of crises and challenges, that they are still going to be able to do well. So the more of these protective factors, the better. Doing well in school and feeling that sense of achievement, intellectual development, things that challenge them, high self-esteem, helping them to develop a stronger sense of self, helping them to manage their emotions, what we call self-regulation skills, helping them to cope and teaching them problem-solving skills, having a family structure that provides stability and monitoring of what they're doing, having access to mentors who can help lead the way, and giving clear expectations for their behavior, and also teaching them about values and why that's so important to a purpose-driven life. Next slide, please. We also find that engagement and connection in two or more of the following contexts can be very, very helpful. So obviously this has become increasingly difficult because of the challenges of the pandemic, but to the point that you can help them to engage and connect in at least two of these contexts, we find that that is a very, very helpful protective factor. So you can see them here listed: schools, peers, participating in athletics and other types of extracurriculars, having some kind of job, a volunteer job, having a kind of a spiritual life or religion, if that applies to the person, having this connection to a culture, having a connection to whatever sense of community that they want to define themselves with, and having a connection within their family system. Next slide, please. I'd like to spend the rest of my time talking about practical, tangible tools to help your youth build resilience. So first of all, we want to normalize conversations about mental health. In light of the tragedy that happened in Texas, I think that everybody is thinking about this. You know, what should we talk to our teens and our children about mental health? What would that look like? Well, the first step is just to help them to acknowledge their feelings and allow them to express whatever feelings they have. There's no wrong feeling. Feelings are all there to serve a purpose, and allow them to air out whatever negative emotion they may have. Also demonstrate to them that maybe you have some of your own struggles and that you have some of your own questions about what happened. And I'm still speaking about how it applies to this tragedy, but also just in general. You can talk to your children about, hey, mommy or daddy, we had a very stressful day today. That happens. That's part of our life, but here's how mommy and daddy try to cope with that. Here's how we try to deal with that. Share that in an age-appropriate way. It's really, really helpful for children to have this model. Validate their experiences, encourage that emotional expression, and teach them specific self-care and coping strategies. So we're going to get into some of this now. Next slide, please. So I like to talk about the pillars of self-care. Now, self-care is still a topic or a term that sometimes people think this is unnecessary, this is a luxury, but it is a requirement for us to be able to do well and for us to take care of other people. So if this is important for us as adults, it's also important for our children. And it's helpful to talk to your child or your teen about making sure that every week there's something that they're doing to stay in touch with one or more of these pillars of self-care. So they can divide it up by days, every single day, try to focus on one aspect of it and make this very intentional. You can work with them to come up with a list so that they can pick from the list things that they would like to do each day. They should be things that the child picks themselves, especially if they get older. Get them to participate in picking some of these items and activities. So physical, emotional, mental, so that's something that might be challenging or interesting to the brain. Practical self-care would be things that are like chores, but you have to do them because then you feel good about having that done, like laundry. Spiritual just means that it's something that helps connect you to the bigger picture. So that can also be something that relates to your community. And finally, something social that helps you to connect with other people that are important to you. When your child experiences negative thoughts, it's really helpful to let them know that we all have negative thoughts. This is something that happens to all of us, but we don't want to let the thoughts take over and we don't want to be defined by our thinking. So here are 4 quick ways to help transform your thoughts that you can teach your children. The first thing that you should tell your child is that thoughts don't always equal the truth. And so if they have a negative thought about themselves or something that might happen, encourage them to actually examine the evidence. What's the evidence that this thought is actually true and happening in reality? And what is the evidence against this thought? Do you have something that actually tells you this isn't actually happening? Then to transform the thought, you can teach them this yes, but technique. So what this means is acknowledging something that isn't going so well, but then acknowledging something that is going well or is in progress. So yes, I didn't do well on my math test this week, but I'm going to try to study a little harder next time and hopefully I'll do better. Right? So helping your children to transform that negative thinking into a thought that is more balanced. Sometimes it's also helpful to de-emphasize the impact of a negative thought by teaching them a technique called labeling. So this helps them to change the relationship they have to their thinking patterns so that they don't take everything as is. So if they have a thought like, I'm never going to make any new friends at my new school, teaching them to put this little sentence in front of it, which is, I'm having the thought that. Notice how that changes your relationship to the thought. All of a sudden, this isn't something that's definitely happening. It's just a thought that you're having. It's just a mental event. And this is something that you can teach very young children all the way to, as they get older, teenagers and young adults will really benefit from this as well. Finally, creating a positive mindset. What I like to do is the 3 things. This means when you wake up in the morning, say out loud 3 things you're grateful for. You can do this as a family activity. You can tell each other your 3 things. You can write this down in a journal on a piece of paper, put it across the home. So there's a lot of different ways that you can involve your entire family in this practice. And this just sets your mind in a different place in the morning so that you're going forward thinking about gratitude and keeping that in mind as you go forward. Next slide, please. I also think that it's really important to teach them how to manage their emotions. So we make lots of to-do lists, and maybe we make some of those for our children too, but how about teaching them to make a joy list? A joy list would be things that brings them joy and is something that they should be in touch with each day. Some of these things can be really easy and simple and take only 5 minutes to do, but it also helps you to regulate your emotions during difficult times. Physicalizing the emotion, I find this to be really helpful, especially for young children, because it's hard for them to describe the emotion. But if you ask them, what would you do if the emotion was like a physical object in real life? What would it look like? Tell me what that feels like. Engage with it with your 5 senses. And this does 2 things. One is separates the person, the child, who is having that emotion from the emotion itself. So they're not dictated by their feelings. But secondly, anything that is in the physical world is something that has actual boundaries. Even the Grand Canyon, as vast as it is, has a beginning and an end. And that really can help them to manage the emotion better when they see that this is not something that's going to go on forever and ever. It might be visualized as a physical object that they can interact with. Encourage your children to create funny moments throughout the day. Teach them to tell a joke, read funny books, watch stand-ups, watch sitcoms, things that can set their mind in a different way. And finally, teach them opposite action. So when they're feeling sad, what's the opposite of the urge of that emotion? So maybe when they're feeling sad, they want to stay in bed all day, but what's the opposite of that? Well, maybe the opposite of that is I'll get up and put on my clothes and maybe go out for a brief walk with the family dog, right? So teach them to use opposite action because behaviors also influence emotions and thoughts. It's a bi-directional process. So if you can change the behavior in the moment, you can also change the way you feel. Practical mindfulness. Mindfulness is a buzzword, but it really works. And this is because when your thoughts are in the past or in the future, that's when anxiety and depression happen most often. If you're able to keep your mind in the present moment, not only will you enjoy what you're doing more, but it can also help you to manage the type of anxieties that might come up if your thoughts are always in the past or in the future. And so practical mindfulness means building mindfulness into things that you're already doing, that are already part of your day. So mindful eating, eating without distractions, without also watching TV, taking a walk and really taking in your surroundings instead of being on your phone or looking at social media. Mindful chore, even washing dishes mindfully. You'll be surprised that you will actually enjoy that chore more when you do it mindfully. And so these are just some of the ideas that you can teach your children and also participate in it yourself to help show them that this is a technique that they can use very easily. And finally, values-based living, teaching your child at any age to start talking about values. These are things that they want to stand for, that they want to be remembered by. They tend to give us a sense of purpose. And it's not something that you check off, but they're things that you can either act consistent with or not in any given moment. And when we align with our values daily, we have more energy and feel more fulfilled, make decisions easier, and have more motivation overall. So next slide, please. And in order to know what your values are, I have a free values card sort at my website. You guys can check that out there. But next slide, please. This is an abbreviated version of a values exercise. So please go to the next slide. So right now, as you guys are looking at this list, I just want you guys to go with your gut and write down your top 5 values as you see them here. Obviously, there are thousands of values in the world, and we may also all define values differently. But go ahead and take a look at this list. And again, go with your gut. I would love to see in the chats what your top 5 values are as you're looking at this list. This is just a common list of values, definitely not everything in the universe of values, but just go ahead and write down in the chat which ones you feel most connected to today. I'll give you guys just a minute to do that. Love seeing these come in. Thank you so much all for participating. And yeah, if you don't have 5, that's okay. If you have a top 2 or top 3, just go with whatever you feel is the most important. A lot of these values all sound great, but if you had to say what your top 5 are, go ahead and just contribute in the chat. I love reading about these right now. Thank you guys so much for putting these in the chat and for participating. It's wonderful. So I'll give this another 30 seconds to give some more people time to respond, and then we're going to just close very quickly about how you can teach our children ideas for values-based living. Wonderful. Thank you all for your participation. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and we can go to the next slide after this. So here's the first application, creating goals based on values, teaching your child to create goals that are linked to top values. This is going to help their motivation and their sense of purpose, and also bolster their self-esteem. And when the going gets tough, they're going to be able to keep going because you can remind them, hey, you're saying that you want to do this because you really care about this value of adventure. And this is a goal that really fits that. And that really helps them to connect to the goal so much more. Next slide, please. The second application is to do a daily values check-in with your child. So review your top 3 values every morning and then ask them, what can you do in the next day, next 24 hours to honor this value? So if they say that community is really important to them, sometimes it might just be picking up the phone and calling a friend that they haven't spoken to in a long time. And the last application we're going to go over today is values-based decision-making. Sometimes when we're overwhelmed and stressed, it can be really hard to make decisions, but ask yourself and teach your child to do this. Which decision will honor my top value most? And when you do this, we're going to have a lot less of looking in the rearview mirror and regretting the decisions that we've made. And it gives your child that confidence to move forward with that decision, knowing that it's the right one for them. So go ahead to the final slide. Thank you all so much for being here. I would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, feedback, or comments, please do reach out to me through my website. And again, just been really wonderful to connect with all of you. Thank you so much for your attention and participation today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ho. I've learned a lot, actually. I think I'm going to use it right away with my moody preteens in the next room. And I thank everyone for their wonderful presentations. I think we've all learned so much and been moved in the process. I am so grateful. If nothing else, also just to introduce all of you, the speakers, to each other, because we've all done such great work. And I hope that something, can grow of that. Mayor Pacheco with her amazing program, which she really pulling the community together to support our girls. Dr. Ho with her fabulous work on all fronts. And of course, the Congresswoman for her leadership, and Dr. Diaz. And I thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to let Dr. Lee and maybe Dr. Silverman as well ask some questions from the audience. And thank you so much again.
I'll go ahead and start. Dr. Ho, again, as Dr. Jacobs-Waldman said, thank you so much for your presentation. Just wondering if, I have a team, and, social media is very difficult for her to avoid. It very much accelerates a lot of the stressors. Do you have any tips on what we can do to help encourage safe social media habits?
Yeah, excellent question. And thanks for the kind words. This is something where it's a necessary evil. It's going to be a part of our lives. And obviously also there is a lot of positive contributions to social media. So it's all about balance and teaching them that balance. I think really educating your children and your teenagers about the fact that if they're under your household, they're still under your rules, and that you have to have access to their passwords. I know that sounds intrusive, but it's really important that you at least have that conversation. And clearly they could still have secret accounts and things like that, but you try your best to keep up. There are actually a lot of websites that educate parents and teachers about the latest and greatest in social media. So keep in touch with those. Talk to your child and teenager about letting them know that essentially you have to have access to their devices and passwords, and that's a privilege that you can take away at any time. And finally, creating social media free zones within the house. So whether that's a time in the house or maybe a certain room, I've told some of the people that I work with that maybe if the family room is where nobody has their phones or social media, you can put a basket by the door, and everybody, including the adults, you got to drop your phone there when you enter that room. And then when you leave, you can pick it up. So just having structure around that, or maybe around meal times, teaching them balance in their use, and also making sure that you're modeling the same thing in your behavior.
I have a question for Dr. Diaz that I received. Do you have strategies for dealing collectively with community trauma? Or, and this is definitely a real doctor question, can you suggest a checklist to screen and manage kids who've experienced trauma? And I would add, if there is a checklist, is there a trauma-informed way of applying it? Oh, sorry, you need to unmute yourself.
I would probably refer to Dr. Ho on the checklist stuff, but in terms of strategies for community trauma, I think that we have to stay connected to the community. As leaders, sometimes we can find ourselves distancing ourselves from the grassroots movement and rhythm. Like I said in the beginning, I'm able to keep my hand on the pulse of the community because of the Congresswoman and her giving me that with the consortium. So I'm able to see what's going on and to hear what's going on through our consortium, that all those that are working in our community with different leadership roles. And so that's very important. So it's not really a set strategy, but I would say that it's important, if you're a leader, to stay connected to the grassroots level and know what's going on in the areas that you serve. It's very important to keep in touch with that. And sometimes, like I said, we get so busy and so into all the other things we're doing that we disconnect from the pulse of who we're serving, and we can't do that. And when you're connected to that, you're able to stay in touch with whatever's going on, whether it be, trauma, whether it be whatever it is that's going on, a high suicide rate, different things, you're able to stay in touch and you know what's happening. But in terms of checklists, Dr. Ho, I'll defer to you.
So what was the original question about the checklist? Heather?
Sorry, yes, a checklist to screen and manage kids who have experienced trauma.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so trauma, we're looking for 4 specific factors here. And the first one is recurring memories or intrusive thoughts about the trauma. So sometimes kids will say they're having flashbacks or nightmares. So that would be one one factor to look into. The second one is avoidance. So avoiding talking about it, thinking about it, processing it in any way to the point where it's really difficult for them when anyone's talking about it. They might have a big physiological reaction, even look like they might be having a panic attack. That would be the second. The third is negative thoughts about themselves and the world around them. So maybe thinking that they're bad, they're damaged, believing that they can never trust other people, making very cynical comments about other people, even people that they've never had a relationship with. That's another part of this checklist. And finally, disturbances to their arousal. So what I mean by that is having difficulty sleeping, having difficulties managing their anger, having trouble with hypervigilance, kind of being very jumpy when somebody comes up behind them. They just have this huge reaction. So if you see any or all of these types of symptoms, that's something to look into and to help that child get connected to some intervention.
I saw a question flash by in the chat, and I would, I think I'll lay it out there. Does anybody want to comment on the intergenerational transmission of trauma?
I can chat about this a little bit. Intergenerational trauma is something that can happen despite people's best efforts, because oftentimes we learn certain behaviors and certain ways to solve problems when we're children. And if there was some dysfunction during that time, it can be sometimes difficult when later on you become a parent and you're at a stress point, and despite some of your best efforts, sometimes that trauma can exist where maybe you take on some of those same coping strategies as your parents and you wish they had done better. So I think it's really important as parents that we should reflect, of course, on our childhood. Nobody's childhood is perfect. And think a little bit about if there's anything that hasn't been processed that needs to be talked about. If you do need to engage a professional in that, do that. But the intergenerational trauma can be broken. It's really just about intention and learning different coping strategies and being able to depart from maybe some of the dysfunction that you grew up with that you thought was a norm. So this is something that we can all proactively do, and there's definitely a solution to it as long as we make a conscious effort towards it.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of our speakers. Thank you, Congresswoman Napolitano, for all the work that you do on a federal level. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I've learned a lot because being not only a grandma, I'm a great grandma. So I learned a lot of things. Also, be sure that you speak in everyday language to people, because it's important in the cultural and appropriate language is very important, because if they don't understand you, I can listen, and if I find a word I don't understand, everything stops.
Absolutely. My kids always tell me, Daddy, you're talking doctor talk. So
right. Yeah. And there are not
and thank you. Yes. Thank you, Congresswoman Napolitano, for all of your work again. I want to thank Downey Mayor Pacheco for the great local work that you're doing. Hopefully is a model for many of our other municipalities and the counties, so that we can get this, to our children. Thank you to Dr. Irma Diaz for making us aware of 988. What a great resource. And Dr. Judy Ho, thank you so much for all of your work and tips. In light of what has happened, we all want to do something, and you've brought to us many things that we can do. Also want to thank Dr. Heather Silverman and Dr. Jacob Swallman for putting this fabulous program together. We look forward to many future events like this in the future. So thank you all. There's never been a more crucial time for us to really help build emotional strength in our kids. And so I want to thank you all for coming together for this. Again, for the physicians, just a quick reminder, there is CME credit available, and you will receive an email so that you can fill out and get that credit. So again, thank you. And I hope you all have a safe and an emotionally safe and strong evening. Thank you.